Welcome back. We are discussing the new approaches that have been made by the Chinese government to the Indian government in Delhi. We have the Foreign Minister of China visiting us on 8th of June. We were just discussing the rising trade deficit. And coming back to the trade deficit, Ambassador Surie, do we have concerns about the investments from China? Professor Kondapalli mentioned that unlike Japan, which has made large investments in India to offset the trade balance or trade imbalance, shall I say, we have not seen that kind of investments from China. But would we be welcoming such kind of investments or the scale of such investments from China?
I think Professor Kondapalli is absolutely right. Chinese have focused on project exports to India. And this is also reflected in the trade figures and is responsible for the bulk of the deficit.
True.
Much of this is in the power sector. I think Chinese investment is welcome in India in accordance with Indian rules and regulations. But Chinese investment has to be of a nature that is consistent with our rules and regulations and is also very climate change neutral. For instance, there is a lot of power equipment coming in, and the criticism is that this will actually increase pollution levels in India, because one of the main reasons for pollution in China, in fact, is the thermal power units that they use.
I see.
So I think these are considerations which just cannot be brushed aside. But on insofar as investment is concerned, of course, they are welcome to invest in India.
And the other side is that their markets also must be open to Indian products, particularly in the area of pharmaceuticals and software.
Well, you see, this is the problem. We have been raising with the Chinese the trade deficit for many years now. We keep getting these assurances, including at the ministerial level, even to the highest levels. But if you look at the areas where we have comparative advantage, it's not just pharmaceuticals and IT. It's also chemicals, it's auto ancillaries, it's advanced engineering. It's a lot of other products where we have the comparative advantage. But the market restrictions, the entry restrictions are such that our products cannot compete. On the other hand, you have a situation where Chinese products and Chinese tenders actually undercut Indian manufacturers in the Indian market. So there are a lot of issues involved over here which need to be discussed very frankly and settled.
So this would be among the clutch of issues which would be taken up hopefully during Foreign Minister Wang Yi's forthcoming visit, and of course subsequently in the bilateral summit level exchanges as well as the dialogue platforms.
This dialogue is already work in progress. I think what we need now is concrete action on the ground. And Foreign Minister Wang Yi will be aware of these problems, and I think he will come with some suggested solutions. But I think we need to look ahead. There is no doubt that the India-China trade relationship is going to be our major trade relationship. In fact, it will be our largest trade relationship.
In fact, it is already the largest trade relationship.
Yeah,
the trade relationship with China is already the largest trade relationship for many other countries.
Well, the second largest if you exclude services, because if you include services, the US is still number one. But otherwise, it's the UAE which is number one, and China is second. But this is we have only touched the very. I would say, I won't just say the surface. We've gone beyond the surface, but there is much more to be done over here. The potential for the bilateral trade relationship is several times what it exists today. There is no doubt in my mind about that. But I think a lot of hard work has to be done, a new ground rules laid
to ensure that the trade is balanced. By balanced, I don't mean that there is a balance between imports and exports, but by balance I mean that comfort levels on both sides have to rise in order to sustain a higher level of bilateral trade.
Absolutely. And I would say, to put in very sort of cliche term, that the low-hanging fruit has already been plucked.
So more effort is needed.
Much more effort is needed. Yeah.
Well, let me now come to another area, which is the area of possible cooperation which we have seen in multilateral fora, particularly areas like climate change, reform of international financial institutions, and so on. Now, Professor Kondapalli, which are some of these areas where we have had the maximum possible convergence with China?
I think on climate change proposals, we have had maximum possible convergence in terms of all the basic countries, Brazil, South Africa, India, China, coming together and addressing at the Copenhagen summit, at Durban summit, as well as Doha. We have had massive coordination on this effort. But I think on the other multilateral fora, the United Nations, we had similar views related to Egypt, Libya, Syria, and to an extent on Ukrainian developments. When Crimea was, joined the Russian Federation, we have had similar wavelengths with the Chinese. But when it comes to, say, Shanghai Cooperation Organization or others,
where we are not members.
Indeed, and when we suggested that we wanted to become membership, the Chinese came out in Almaty and in other meetings that the aspirant states should not have sovereignty related disputes with the
which was a
SCO
polite
member
way
states.
of putting a veto on our case. But tell me, when we are looking at areas, Professor Kondapalli referred to a number of areas, Syria, Libya, etc., where our views and the Chinese views have been convergent. One of the areas that is often talked about, an area which is of great concern to us, is Afghanistan, and there are a lot of question marks about the future of Afghanistan post 2014. Chinese are major investors in the biggest copper mining project. India is a major investor in what is potentially one of the biggest iron ore projects in Afghanistan. Is there prospect for cooperation, do you think, Ambassador Surie, in Afghanistan for India and China?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I see no reason why we cannot cooperate. But again, here the Chinese have to take a fundamental decision. Whose side are they on? Are they on Pakistan's side or on the side of generating a better relationship with India? Because the problem is that, as you know, and you've been ambassador in Afghanistan, you know this better than I do, that very often the Pakistanis hold this for an informal veto on what the Chinese do in Afghanistan. Now, take for instance the attacks in Xinjiang. I think and recent attacks have been pretty bloody and violent. I think it's well known that a lot of these people have been trained either in Afghanistan or in parts of its eastern neighbor. But you will notice that the Chinese are very careful in their criticism of where these terrorists have come from. They are still handling it as a law and order
many
problem.
of them have been promised Pakistani passports, and when they have been apprehended in China, they have been found to be carrying Pakistani passports.
That's true. So that's why, I think it's important. And this what you mentioned about Afghanistan cooperation in development of natural resource projects or other development projects, it applies not only in Afghanistan, it applies across the board. It applies in Africa, in Latin America, in Myanmar, it applies in Central Asia. If there is a genuine desire to work together, I think the prospects for Sino-Indian cooperation on third country projects is so potentially large that it is mind-boggling.
The BCIM, Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar corridor, economic corridor, is a project that the Chinese seem to be very keen on. At what stage are we on considering, and what are its possible potential beneficial implications?
The BCIM project, as far as I am aware, what was agreed so far, I think this was when Prime Minister went to China last year, is that there will be a working group set up to study the pros and cons. The way I see the BCIM is, it's a very limited project. It basically is intended to benefit certain parts of southeast and southwest China, Yunnan essentially. Now, if you take as far as China is concerned, but on the other hand, if Yunnan is a channel to send in stuff through Myanmar into India and Bangladesh, then you are looking at a different scenario altogether.
But in addition to the potential cooperative aspect, there is also a strong competitive aspect vis-a-vis China, and many sectors that we look at, whether it is on the economic side or whether it is particularly on the strategic side, China's maritime strategy, China's relationship, which has been in difficulties particularly with Japan and with Vietnam because of South China Seas. Now, where do you see in balance the evolution in terms of cooperation and competition? Professor Kondapalli.
I think in terms of the previous period, we have seen the Himalayas as a kind of a barrier between India and China. So far so good in terms of these Himalayas as they were not punctured with the infrastructure projects.
But they are no longer the same barrier, because now you have maritime linkages and other linkages.
Till
The
about
Karakoram, for example, is being expanded.
Till about the 1980s, the Chinese assessments were that they will not be able to become a major actor in South Asia unless until they have these projects in place. So the Western Development Campaign initiated several of these: the Tibet Railway, the Karakoram Highway expansion, the hydroelectricity projects in Pakistan occupied Kashmir, and the railway project from Havelian to Kunjarab, which has been accepted in principle by the then President Hu Jintao. These are some of the
Last word from you, Ambassador Surie, on this competition, cooperation, the syndrome that seems to be driving the India-China relationship.
I think this is inherent in the relationship. It will remain competitive. There will be large areas of cooperation. There may be areas of dispute, but we have the mechanisms to look at the disputes, and most important is that we have to manage this relationship, and that is where the merits and the ability of the new government will be tested.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of this edition of Wide Angle. Thank you very much for joining us, and goodbye.